The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Hassan pushed his cart down the marble hallway, the wheels squeaking against the pristine floor of Meridian Financial Tower. It was 3:47 a.m., and the 42nd floor was supposed to be empty. His calloused hands gripped the mop handle tighter as he thought about Layla sleeping in their one-bedroom apartment across town, her small frame curled beneath the threadbare blanket he'd tucked around her just hours earlier. 8 years old, and already she was learning to make her own breakfast because Daddy had to work 3 jobs to keep their world from crumbling. Hassan had never imagined his life would look like this. 5 years ago, he was Dr. Hassan al-Rashid, a respected pediatric surgeon in Damascus, with hands that saved children's lives and a future that seemed as solid as the ancient stones of his homeland. Then the bombs started falling, and everything changed. His wife Amira died in the collapse of their apartment building while he was at the hospital, trying desperately to save other people's children. In that moment, his world became singular. Protect Layla, get her to safety, build something from nothing. America had offered them sanctuary, but it hadn't offered them dignity. His medical degree meant nothing here without years of recertification he couldn't afford. His perfect English, learned in London during his residency, couldn't erase the suspicion in people's eyes when they heard his accent. So he cleaned floors, emptied trash, and swallowed his pride because his daughter's future mattered more than his wounded ego. The sound of raised voices stopped him mid-step. Conference room should have been dark and silent, but warm light spilled from under the door, and he could hear the unmistakable tension of an argument in progress. Hassan hesitated. His supervisor had been clear, invisible, efficient, and above all, unnoticed. But something about the urgency in those voices made him pause. Through the slightly ajar door, he could see 12 people seated around a massive glass table, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptops and scattered documents. At the head sat Margaret Chen, Meridian's CEO, her usually composed demeanor cracked with stress. Across from her, a man in an expensive suit was speaking rapidly into his phone in what Hassan immediately recognized as Arabic. "The Dubai investors are pulling out," the man announced as he ended his call. Switching to English, "They're saying the cultural sensitivity reports are inadequate. Without their backing, the entire Middle East expansion dies tomorrow." Margaret's face went white. "That's a $2 billion project, David. Thousands of jobs. We've been working on this for 3 years. They want to speak to someone who understands their concerns, someone who can bridge the cultural gap," David continued, loosening his tie. "They specifically mentioned feeling like their values and traditions weren't being respected in our proposals." Hassan found himself leaning closer, his heart racing. He knew that feeling intimately, and the exhaustion of being misunderstood, of having your culture reduced to stereotypes and check boxes. In his former life, he'd worked with international medical organizations, navigating the delicate balance between modern healthcare and traditional beliefs. "We don't have anyone on staff who speaks Arabic fluently," another voice chimed in. "The translators we hired for the documents clearly missed something crucial." "It's not just language," Hassan whispered to himself, then froze as he realized he'd spoken aloud. The room fell silent, and 12 pairs of eyes turned toward the door. Margaret stood slowly. "Hello? Is someone there?" Hassan's first instinct was to run. Every immigrant's nightmare was making waves, drawing attention, becoming a problem. But something deeper held him in place. Perhaps it was the memory of his wife urging him to always help when he could, or maybe it was the image of Layla asking him what he did at work, and his vague answers about keeping things clean. He knocked gently and stepped into the room, his janitor's uniform a stark contrast to the sea of tailored suits. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was cleaning the hallway and couldn't help but overhear. I didn't mean to intrude." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Hassan could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. A janitor, immigrant, interruption. But Margaret surprised him. "You speak Arabic?" she asked directly. "Yes, ma'am. It's my native language. But more than that, I understand what they might be concerned about." Hassan's voice grew stronger as he continued. "It's not just about translation. It's about understanding that business in the Middle East is built on relationships, on trust, on feeling seen and respected for who you are, not just what you can provide." David scoffed. "I'm sorry, but we're dealing with billion-dollar investments here." "This Inda." "Let him speak," Margaret interrupted, gesturing to chair. "Please, sit down." "What's your name?" "Hassan al-Rashid, ma'am." He remained standing, acutely aware of his position. "I don't want to overstep, but in my experience, Middle Eastern investors often pull back when they feel like they're being treated as just another source of capital, rather than partners whose cultural values are understood and respected." One of the board members, an older woman with silver hair, leaned forward. "What kind of experience?" Hassan took a deep breath. This was the moment he usually deflected, changed the subject, kept his past buried. But looking around the room at these desperate faces, he thought of Layla and a world he wanted to build for her, a one where people were valued for their contributions, not dismissed because of their circumstances. "Before I came to America, I was a pediatric surgeon in Syria. I worked with international medical charities, including several funded by Gulf investors. I learned that successful partnerships require more than good business plans. They require understanding each other's values, especially around family, community, and social responsibility." The room's energy shifted palpably. Margaret sat back down, her eyes sharp with new interest. "What do you think went wrong with our proposal?" "May I?" Hassan gestured toward the scattered documents on the table. With permission, he began reading through the executive summary, his trained mind quickly identifying the issues. "Your proposal focuses heavily on profit margins and growth projections, which is important, but you haven't addressed how this expansion will benefit local communities, how it will respect Islamic business principles, or how it will honor the cultural traditions that these investors care deeply about." For the next hour, Hassan found himself in the strangest situation of his American life, not cleaning up after these powerful people, but sitting among them as an equal, sharing insights that only someone who had lived in both worlds could provide. He explained the concept of waste and the importance of personal relationships and social capital. He outlined Islamic banking principles that would need to be considered. Most importantly, he helped them understand that the Arab investors weren't trying to be difficult. They were trying to ensure that any partnership would honor their values and benefit their communities. "They want to know that you see them as more than just money," Hassan explained. "In Arab culture, business relationships are like family relationships. They develop slowly, based on trust and mutual respect." As dawn began to creep through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. David, who had initially dismissed Hassan, was now taking detailed notes. Margaret had called off all other meetings for the day. "Hassan," she said finally, "would you be willing to join our call with the Dubai investors this morning, not as a translator, but as a cultural consultant?" Hassan thought of Layla, probably just waking up in their small apartment, getting ready for school. He thought of the other jobs he'd have to miss, the pay he'd lose, but he also thought of the possibility, not just for this moment, but for what it might mean. Yes, "Ma'am, I'd be honored." The video call that followed was unlike anything the Meridian executives had ever experienced. Hassan didn't just translate words, he translated intentions, cultural nuances, and underlying concerns that had been lost in previous communications. When the lead Dubai investor, Mr. Al-Mamad, mentioned his worries about the project's impact on local employment, Hassan helped the Meridian team understand this wasn't just about economics, it was about social responsibility and community stewardship, values deeply embedded in Islamic business ethics. By the end of the 2-hour call, the Dubai investors had not only renewed their commitment but increased their investment by 30%, impressed by Meridian's willingness to truly understand and respect their perspective. As the call ended and the room began to empty, Margaret approached Hassan. "I have a proposition for you. We need someone to head our new cultural integration department, someone who can help us build genuine relationships with international partners. The salary would be $150,000 to start, plus benefits, plus travel opportunities for cultural consultations." Hassan stared at her, speechless. It was more money than he'd made in all 3 of his jobs combined. It was a chance to use his mind again, to build something meaningful. "There's just one thing," Margaret continued with a smile. "The position requires someone who can see beyond surface differences, who understands that the most valuable insights often come from unexpected places. Think you can handle that?" 3 months later, Hassan stood in the same conference room, but everything had changed. He wore a tailored suit now, but more importantly, he carried himself differently, with the confidence of someone whose contributions were valued. The cultural integration program he developed was being implemented across all of Meridian's international partnerships, and their success rate with global investors had increased by 400%. But the moment that mattered most came that evening, when he picked up Layla from her new school, a better school in a safer neighborhood they could now afford. "Daddy, what do you do at work?" she asked as they walked to their new car. Hassan smiled, thinking of all the ways he could answer that question. "I help people understand each other. Sweetheart, I help them see that we're all more alike than we are different." "That sounds important," Layla said seriously. "It is," Hassan replied, lifting her up for a hug. "But not as important as being your daddy." As they drove home to their new apartment, one with 2 bedrooms and windows that let in plenty of light, Hassan thought about the unexpected journey that had brought them here. He'd started that night as an invisible janitor, someone paid to clean up after others without being seen. But sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places, and the most important bridges are built by those who have walked in multiple worlds. The story of Hassan al-Rashid became legend at Meridian Financial, not just because of the billion-dollar deal he'd saved, but because of what he represented, the idea that dignity, respect, and human understanding were the true currencies of success. His journey from janitor to executive proved that in America, transformation was possible, but it required people willing to see beyond surface appearances and recognize the extraordinary potential that exists in ordinary moments. In a world increasingly divided by differences, Hassan's story served as a reminder that sometimes the person with the answers you need is the one you least expect, the one whose voice you haven't been listening to, whose story you haven't taken the time to understand. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to step forward, speak up, and bridge the gaps between worlds to change everything.